more program engagement from incarcerated women. So I do think this is a pretty good response from them. Most of the individuals who responded were on the higher end of the security level. So medium and up, 65% were medium, 12.8% were maximum. So bear that in mind when we are examining current engagement in programming and experience with programming, that we do have different levels of program availability based upon security classifications. And that is something that we saw and we'll dive into more later. Half of the respondents have a crime of violence conviction that they are currently serving for or in their criminal history. Most of them are not returning within the next 2 years. So when we're talking about reentry needs and reentry opinions, this is something that for a lot of the respondents is something that's very future focused. Most of the respondents are not serving a life sentence, about 79% of them. So this is a group that is going home, as most individuals behind the wall are. But this is also a fairly educated group. 63% have a high school diploma or GED. But the last element was what was, I think, most surprising when we were going through the data, was that 73.4% are enrolled in some program or activity. So that could be an institutional job, that could be work release, they're in mandatory education programming, or they're currently engaged in a treatment program. I will note it's possible that more of them are also engaged in social work programming, since that's not tracked in our central case management system of record. So we do think to some extent that this 73% is an undercount of their potential current program engagement. That doesn't speak to their engagement over the entirety of their incarceration. But I will again be mindful that a lot of these individuals are not in that 18-month reentry period. So this means that they're engaging in program before that period. The reason I note this is because that's actually a pretty high engagement rate for programming compared to what we know we see across the entire system. So that's the first indicator that we got of a little bit of, I would say, a pro-reentry bias in a good way in the data, that these are individuals who largely are joiners, right? They're engaged in programming, and I think that bears through in some of their responses. So on the next slide. Key trends. All of the individuals indicate, not all the individuals, of the different cohorts that we looked at, all of the groups pretty consistently identified that there were more services needed than available. And we did this by calculating when they indicated in the survey responses, they had the ability to indicate which services were necessary. So when we look at how many and tallied the number of services that they identified as needed or missing, there was a greater number of them than the ones that they had reported as being available to them, and more programs available than programs that they had found to be helpful. And we'll get again into how that informs our data gaps. Overall, there were very low ratings on individuals' estimation of the program quality, regardless of whether they were engaged or not. Women and individuals in pre-release facilities. So those are typically facilities, both the women's facility and the pre-release facility, where there's a lot more program density per capita. They reported higher program quality satisfaction compared to individuals in pretrial facilities and individuals in DOC facilities. And that's also reflected in their estimation of the calculation of how many programs they identified as being available. But one of the biggest trends that we saw were how priorities and challenges post-release varied widely by age group, and I also say life stage, and we'll speak to that a little bit more when we get into those trends. But the top 5 for the entire group's responses, their top 5 needs that they identified currently. So this is not related to reentry, but the way the question was phrased was related to their carceral experience, were better living conditions, job training, mental health support, substance use treatment, and educational opportunities. The top 5 challenges post-release that they identified were finding housing, financial issues, getting a job, avoiding substance use, and legal barriers. And the top 5 helpful programs that they had engaged with were faith services, education, mental health, vocational training, and then we had a tie for number 5 between life skills and substance use treatment. And that was the general consensus for everyone, and we'll get into how some of those priorities change by age right now. What we did see fairly consistently was that different age groups prioritize different needs during reentry. So for geriatric aged individuals, age 56 and up, and this is again, I want to clarify, we calculate geriatric age very differently when we're talking about the incarcerated population and individuals that have been in a congregate housing setting and separated from, typically they have advanced healthcare needs. That is not the common understanding of the term geriatric. But those individuals place a stronger priority on housing and having access to physical health care, as well as legal assistance and mental health support. And that big disparity that we saw there was in the focus on access to physical health care. That's something that we saw as really where we saw it as a priority, it was mostly with the older populations, whereas the number one highest priority for emerging adults aged 18 to 25 was getting a job. So we see this priority shifting from immediate employment to general financial concerns to, I would say, housing, social determinants of health, housing and healthcare for the older population. Now, the top five, that you saw before, challenges and needs, those did stay consistent. It was the ranking within different age groups that was really most notable, indicating that perhaps the complexity of financial issues faced by individuals aged 36 to 55 who may be coming back to more complex family environments. They may need different levels of financial literacy and financial support than perhaps younger individuals who maybe have, family ties that are stronger, more recent because they haven't been separated by long periods of incarceration, where housing was less of a priority compared to just finding a job. And then, of course, the opportunity for better interagency handoff as it comes to healthcare coordination for that older population. But one thing that was also very notable was mental health and substance use treatment need was highest among adults aged 36 to 45. So that may be an indication not just of where reentry programming can expand, but where we can focus some of the state's 1115 Medicaid expansion efforts, specifically in reaching the needs of those who have opioid use disorder treatment that they'll be able to access through this partnership, as well as those with serious mental illness. Next slide. And I will take a big break at the end for questions, just in case anyone's having them as we go along. We did see differences in available services closely correlating to current security classification. So that's another focus for us, is that not everyone is having the same reentry experience because of their security classification. And we see that on a micro level with the number of services that they identify as available and missing specifically. So you'll see individuals who are on Max 2 are most restrictive, most secure, typically they're all at North Branch. They identified far more services as missing than individuals in a pre-release setting. Some similarity in the number of available services, though not necessarily which services are available. And then they had the fewest proportion of services on average that they identified as helpful. And that tends to tie in a bit to what we're seeing around the impression as individuals engage in those services, where women and individuals in pre-release tend to report slightly higher opinions of the services that they've engaged in. Although I will say, as you can see consistently across all groups, regardless of where they're currently housed, the overall consensus is more than 50% would rate the programs that they engage with as poor or very poor. For women, because we know that this is a distinct population with really distinct needs, they were more likely to respond, and they also reported higher program availability. They tended to be a little bit more engaged in programming than the men when we separate them out. They also were less likely to be serving a crime of violence or life sentence. They are younger on average. They're more likely to have a GED, and there's 3 times as many proportionally on pre-release status. So they have a little bit of a different reentry landscape. They're not as likely to be prohibited from external job assignments. They're not as likely to be serving as lengthy of a sentence with as many, I would say, legal barriers in reentry. And you see a shift in the difference of priorities both now and their challenges post-release. So compared to the men surveyed, women placed a much higher focus on better living conditions. And also a higher focus on physical healthcare needs, as well as substance use treatment access. And for biggest challenges post-release, again, finding housing was more of a concern for this population, which I think points us in a direction of examining what challenges specific to women affect housing. I'm speaking specifically to documented overlaps with women who've experienced intimate partner violence and justice involvement, and potential issues and complexity in the homes that they would be returning to. And that's also reflected in the heightened priority on family reunification, as well as avoiding substance use. Data gaps, there were a number of them as we started looking through the data. One, I would say, as we're using this information to frame the questions in the focus groups, definitely better tailoring of questions and validation to services experienced. So the way that the questions were phrased, for some of them, enabled us to gather a large amount of information by allowing individuals to select multiple programs that they were indicating as needed or helpful. However, we saw real lack of consistency. So for example, many individuals reported no services available, even as they were enrolled in programs. They identified programs as missing that they were enrolled in, programs as not available so individuals, for example, who found that education was missing, but they'd had a GED. So refining the questions to understand what it is about the level of program access, or specifically maybe focusing in on what availability means, whether that's more of a need for programs to be available over a period of time or time of day or accessibility of programs, really honing in on that. That gets to the second point as well. Understanding how programs were offered. One of the things I discussed with Director Rappaport is also understanding eligibility. There are very few factors beyond classification that would affect eligibility for individuals. So really understanding how much that perception of availability is affected by what clear communication there is for incarcerated individuals of how to enroll in programs and what eligibility, where eligibility for different programs may compete with one another, and how best to kind of communicate those options and promote individual agency in the selection of those programs. And then better understanding, as I mentioned, of program elements that are desired, especially as it pertains to closing that gap between program engagement and program satisfaction. So understanding what it was about the program, categorically that many individuals would see as needed, if it's cultural competence, if it's frequency, if it's the length of access that someone may have to the program, or even the order, being able to feeling like they might be able to benefit more from certain programs if they'd come at a different point in their incarceration. And then again, maybe a more focused examination of how helpful the enrolled programs are to the population, the difference between the programs that individuals were in and the programs that they felt were needed. And then as well as how other states have tailored programs to be age responsive. And that's really kind of trying to identify where the needs that are very keen for emerging adults may not be served by programs that were designed for, I would say, adults who are middle-aged. I'll in that bulk of our population. And then again, we had a pretty large gap of respondents at YDC and within pretrial facilities. So it may be helpful to better understand in potentially future surveys as well, beyond just the facility, but also the status, whether someone was a detainee or they were sentenced. in addition to just the time before their release date, as well as whether they had prior experiences of incarceration and reentry, and how that shapes both their expectations of reentry, but also their preparedness and what they perceive as the needs of the process. So for example, someone who maybe has been incarcerated before and is carrying with them some of that experience, as well as individuals who really don't necessarily know the challenges that are ahead of them if this is their first time being incarcerated for a substantial amount of time. But the key findings, just to kind of reiterate, it really underlines the need for a diverse and responsive reentry strategy, tailoring programs to, the biggest difference we saw was by age, although there were some differences by gender. It was really that life stage that framed what individuals' priorities and challenges were the most. So being able to communicate that in reentry, that it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. But also there's consistent communication of a high degree of economic support and stability needs during reentry. And it's that specific financial issues and job insecurity that bears, I think, a high level of support, especially considering the complexity that justice involvement can contribute to individuals' financial challenges. Given the overlap between the age of individuals and the priority for physical healthcare access post-release, potentially need to explore connections to Medicare enrollment for prison geriatric aged releasees, and explore program models of availability for pretrial detainees for the great number of individuals in our system, as well as other local systems who have indeterminate sentences that may affect the ability to proceed with normal reentry planning. But I will end on the note that surprised me the most was that regardless of the high level of need communicated, that individuals saw a lot of room for growth, saw a lot of programs that were missing, and maybe had less than stellar experiences with the programs that they were in. The vast majority of individuals expressed that they felt prepared for reentry. And it was the pretty big disparity between very prepared for reentry and very happy with programs. So I think the sum totality of individuals' experiences seems to be perhaps broader than just the program offerings. And I'll be remiss, I passed through it. And one thing I want to go back and really highlight on the second slide to end on is these top 5 helpful programs. When we focus a lot on our prior reentry expansion efforts, there is a prevailing focus on those reentry programs that have a very demonstrated recidivism reducing effect. Programs that carry with them, the formality of concrete attainable skills, coming out with a certification, a job training certificate, a diploma. But by and large, what individuals seem to be prioritizing and indicating was meeting their needs were a lot of those reentry programs that were related to their mental health needs. Faith Services was the #1 rated most helpful program, and life skills. So I think it very much communicates to us that the population is placing a high premium on those reentry programs that meet their emotional and psychological needs, as well as what just makes them functional upon return from incarceration. And A.S. Brooks, I see you have a question.
Yes. First of all, I want to thank you for taking that data and really breaking it out and analyzing it to bring us to this point. So a couple of questions that I have. You said in the beginning that only 16% of the population filled out the survey. That's kind of not really surprising because most of us don't like filling out surveys even when we get them at home. But were we able to differentiate between that 18%, who were the long-term sentence individuals that you referenced that were the majority that filled it out versus those that would have been 18 months or less? Was it any way to differentiate that number? That's my first question.
Yep. About 14.7% of the individuals who were surveyed were going home in the next 180 days, 13% in the next year. So think about 25
Okay.
A quarter of them fall within our traditional reentry timeline. An
Good.
additional 20% were going home within the next 2 years, so within that 18 months. But, half of them weren't going home for the next 5 years, if at all. 7.5% of them were lifers,
Wow.
and 17% reported that they did not know. So that may be because they were pretrial or just because, they have different sentences overlapping one another.
And that helps us differentiate between the real push for those that are close to getting out and the programming. But when you go back to that slide where you had the 3 priority levels, those are not surprising to me. Again, for those that are within the 18-month or less, did the majority of them fall into any one of these, the needs versus challenge versus the helpful program, that we could really pull out and focus on now for that group of that cohort that did respond, if I'm answering my question correctly?
No, you absolutely are. I will say we tended to see the biggest changes in the age groups, which I think speaks to the fact that individuals' perceptions of their needs is related to themselves and where they are maybe in their life stage, more so necessarily than a release timeline, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I was just a little surprised. I'm going to stop because I'm sure other people have lots of questions. I was a little surprised to see from the female responses of what their beliefs were versus their recidivism rate, because females have come back quite frequently over a span of time, although they say they're satisfied with the programming, getting the most help. That number's real small versus what I'm hearing, boots on the ground, that people are coming back with it and recidivating within the 3-year period. But anyway, great job. Let's go. Let the next hand go, because I think Donna's hand went up, Josh's hand went up, several hands going up. But thank you, ma'am.
Yes, thank you. This is super helpful. I have many questions, but I'm going to only ask one, which is the finding that most feel prepared for reentry. Would so love to dig into why. What makes them feel that way? Do they have housing lined up they feel great about? Do they have employment waiting for them? Like all the things that they're worried about, what? So it could be kudos to DPSCS who's getting them ready, but it would be so interesting to drill down on that. And I'm not sure if you can shed any light on that or what, but just curious, but thank you.
No, thank you. That I had similarly, I was a little surprised by that as well. And I think that really digs into a lot of the questions that were asked were really very much focused on program engagement. And that's really a what question, and not, and maybe this is something that's really better achieved through qualitative measures of what makes, why do people feel prepared for reentry? Why do they feel prepared to go home? Because it may be that that's something that's not measured here.
Right. Maybe we can do that in our focus groups when we speak to folks. Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Speaking of focus group, Assistant Secretary Guarino, again, you all have done an outstanding job with putting this presentation together. But I was wondering, based off of what you've been able to gather from the raw data that's been collected, if you all could put together some questions that you feel would be helpful for the focus group to really pull all of this together. Of course, we will have our own questions, but I'm wondering if we could collectively come up with a combined list of questions that will shed more light on the findings that we have from the previous survey that we put out there. I think that would be helpful.
Absolutely happy to. And I also indicated this to Director Rappaport as we were going over the results, that this was really intended as just a high-level overview for the task force currently. We know that this data, I think, will be key in the final report that you all will be authoring and guiding, but the department's partnership in this is steadfast throughout, and my team and I are happy to support digging into this data further should you wish to elaborate on it more in your final report.
Oh, no, we do. And I think that, your team will be able to help us with telling the full narrative as it pertains to what we've been able to ascertain from the population. Not only with helping us kind of, put questions that make sense together that will assist us with data, but also I'm wondering whether or not, for the purpose of recording this information and getting it back to your team so we can have a more comprehensive presentation that our other subcommittees can utilize, whether you all could assist us with that as well.
Speaking only for myself, absolutely happy to, Chair.
Okay, thank you.
I will be happy to do that as well, because this has drawn a lot of questions in my mind, especially what exactly does better living conditions mean to them? I know one thing they're going to say is central air conditioning. Well, prisons weren't built with central air conditioning. So it would cost millions of dollars to get some air conditioning. But what else besides that when it's in the summertime? And I'm so happy to see mental health and substance abuse at the top of the need now priorities, as well as helpful program on the back end, because we have to really hone in on that with both feet and a lot of resources and money. Go ahead, all those other hands. Christian.
I think Dr. Andrews might have commented and raised his hand before I did. Did you want to go first, Dr. Andrews?
Sure, yeah. I don't know if folks see the comment. Let me try to read it. But yeah, I was just, to the points 3 and 4 that show that women in pre-release are feeling satisfied with programming. Have you taken an assessment to identify what programs are being offered at MCIW and pre-release that, they're speaking to?
I can take an initial stab at that, and of course I'll defer to Director Rappaport. It has been, I think, some years since I saw the full list, but historically, due to the physical plant and the fact that there's multiple different security classifications housed together, and MCIW is an administrative classified facility, it is easier to have programs there that can reach a greater proportion of the population. So if you measure it by facility, consistently a higher proportion of the population at MCIW is engaged in some program compared to any other facility within DOC, within DPSCS. So that's been a long-standing trend. Part of that, I think, that's not something that's unique to Maryland. That is something that is seen in other states. So part of that is, to some extent, behavior, desire to engage in programming, but also we have a greater ability to deliver a higher number of programs at MCIW because there's only one facility compared to the entirety of the DOC side. For pre-release, similarly, I think the key there, that's where you'll see a really stark difference between the accessibility of certain programs, especially those that lead to being outside the wall, like work release, that are not available at higher security facilities.
But also, Assistant Secretary, you also have Project Fresh, I believe, that's over there at MCIW that focuses on preparation for reentry, if I'm not mistaken?
That's correct. Thank you so much. Director Rappaport has probably forgotten more about that program than I've ever learned. But one of the aspects of that model that really go to the housing is having the social worker co-located in the housing unit with the individuals. So it's about having consistent access and programming on the tier, which is what that particular unit physical plant allows in a way that other facilities may not. But
and maybe I should clarify my question real quick. Thank you for that. That was helpful. And so our organization, P2P, we offer our prisons and professionals programming both at MCIW and pre-release. And we do, we also do surveys to evaluate our programming. But I was wondering if you all took, like within this assessment, if you tried to see if there was a program level like question to the question seemed to ask, did they think programming was, satisfaction with programming overall? I guess my question is asking whether there was any like qualitative questions or the ability for them to say exactly which programs they were referring to that they felt that they were satisfied or dissatisfied with.
That is a great insight, Dr. Andres. Thank you so much. That was a bit of a disconnect as far as the data gaps, that the programming question was related to overall and not necessarily just the programs that individuals were engaged in. That was a major, I would say, gap that we saw, that we didn't have the opportunity for individuals in this survey to indicate which programs they had personally been able to enroll in at some point during their incarceration. Because we saw where there were indicators compared with the data that we can pull out from our case management system, there were conflicts between the responses and then programs that we know individuals are in. So I think that would be something that would be really helpful to hone in on with the qualitative focus groups.
Yeah, Dr. Andres, to answer your question though, so far as coming forward, and we'll talk about this in our subcommittee reports, we most definitely will ask that question when we go to the facility and make sure that is a part of our focus group to identify specific programs that have been most helpful in preparation for reentry. Christian Gann, I see your hand.
Thanks. I think this might have been kind of covered, so please apologies. But what stuck out, one thing that stuck out to me was looking at these the needs and the challenges in the program, the top 5 programs. Just thinking like, how are these kind of evaluated, and is our regular survey results, regular surveys or evaluation going on? And I'm curious. I see I'm just curious, of life skills being kind of low on that. So are there any, maybe programming that needs to be either revised or sunsetted to maybe preserve resources for more popular or helpful programs? So just kind of thinking along those lines, are we looking at, again, have all these been around forever? Or are there any we can kind of change or amend or anything like that, given the results?
Yeah, thank you for that question. To place this into context, there were 13 different categories of programs listed in the dropdown that individuals were responding on, and those largely encompass the programs that we know are available behind the wall. So actually, although it looks kind of far down on the list, life skills being in the top 5 out of 13 is actually fairly high, given some of the focus on the recidivism reducing power and the preparedness that other programs like job certifications or MCE may carry. So that was, I think, for me at least, looking at primary assignments day in and day out, that was a very interesting and very practical articulation of value that I think is worth some follow-up with the focus groups. As it pertains to ongoing surveys, as I mentioned, this is only the 2nd survey that we have deployed to the II population. Each time we get more engagement, and one of the strategies that we discussed is engagement, not just during the survey and pre-survey, but post-survey. So preparing this information, not just for external stakeholders and decision makers, but to also return back to the II community through the tablets, which can be done in a PDF format, both as a transparency measure and a thank you, to really show that we're valuing and listening to their voices, in the hopes that we can create, I think, a more organic feedback loop to continue to keep this open as a chain of communication for the department, as it may play into Director Rappaport's plans in the future to have ongoing reentry programming that's informed by the incarcerated population.
Assistant Secretary Brooks.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed this conversation. Great points. With this being a survey that was generated by the task force to begin with, the result that we've gotten has helped us to drill down and focus on additional questions that we could and should be asking. And with that said, when we deploy another one, even though you're going to do the focus groups, I still think, and just my opinion as one of the members, in the future, not only should we take another stab at trying to get another response to a survey, we should do an infomercial before we release the survey, like we did for the IDs, for example, and explain why it's important for them to provide their feedback and input to this survey to try and get a bigger bang for the buck of responses back. But the drill down the questions between the members of the task force, others that's looking at this data, I think it'll end up being a win-win in the long run. That's just my opinion, but that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
I think that's a valuable point. Assistant Secretary Guarino, looking at all of this information, if we were to go back for another survey on top of the focus groups, what would that look like? Can your team kind of help us with that? I mean, of course, we're looking at it too, but this is something that your department does day in and day out, looking at data, looking at measurements. I think that's something worthy of asking your group to kind of like look at looking at the data gaps that you've identified. What would some great follow-up questions for a survey be versus a focus group?
Thank you for that question. I think one of the first things would be asking from the individual to indicate whether they had, prior experiences with incarceration reentry, really getting in a structured way some insight into individuals' experience previously, not needing to, not doing it from a perspective of trying to, hunt down everyone's criminal history. That's really not necessarily productive, but also understanding, closing the gap on understandings of fellowship behind the wall as well as within the community, on getting a structured question surrounding connection to family. We saw a focus for the women as well as for the men on family reunification, but really understanding, what strength of community ties, if things are making individuals feel prepared for reentry and it's not necessarily tied to programs, what's that social component that they may be more or less connected? That's something that if we had it as a analysis point, I think would be very interesting to look at along with length of incarceration to identify what are the nuances, both among the population who've been incarcerated for long stretches of time, as well as for individuals who may, just feel more isolated from their communities due to separation, and that can correlate to risks behind the wall as well. And we were not very specific in some of the questions surrounding what aspects of returning to everyday life may be specifically challenging. And I think getting insight there would be helpful. There were some indications, especially for the women, had a little bit more of a focus on transportation challenges. So the logistics of reentry, and especially the day of reentry. We tended to speak of reentry as this kind of large amorphous process, but we didn't get a feeling from the individuals of whether they were thinking of, the day and the practicalities of how do I get home physically, versus, am I thinking a year out, 5 years out? That and really the biggest data gap being what programs they had previously engaged in as well.
Thank you so much for that. Does anyone else have any questions for Assistant Secretary Guarino? I know that we could be here all day talking about this. I am conscious of people's time. It's 11:48, and I like to end on time, and we still have a couple of other items on the agenda.
I just had one question, Chairman. This was done on the tablet, or was it simulated by paper and tablet?
It was done on the tablets. Thank you so much. That was, granted, that is something that can introduce a certain amount of gaps, especially for individuals who perhaps are not within general population. However, given the breadth and scale of it, it was the most leverageable given how many responses we were looking to get. And I will also note, that we have another survey planned independent of this task force. So that'll be a better indication, as it becomes something that the II population has some fluency with, we may see kind of the closing of the gap in responses there.
Thank you for that. Assistant Secretary Brooks made a good point too. If we could do a sort of infomercial type of run before it, but also put into that infomercial that also if you're not using a tablet or you haven't used a tablet, please see your building sergeant or lieutenant to be able to request a survey. So something along those lines, so we can also get those people that do not, because I know some that absolutely do not even use the tablet or don't put money on the tablet to be able to use the tablet. So, just trying to grab to cast that net a lot for a larger group of fish.
So we can, you raise a very important parity question that we can dig into to understand for individuals, the extent to which there is any barrier to participation that is financial. But I will state proactively that I do not know what workload would be entailed in then receiving paper surveys and coding that data. And that may not be something that I know my unit doesn't have the staff to support that. So I just would really highly encourage real attention to the feasibility of how this data is collected.
I concur with that, but I'm also going to take this time to do a plug that the Lived Experience Committee and Mr. Curtis Austin was among the membership, did an outstanding infomercial, 2 females and 2 males, on getting the identification before they leave and why Social Security cards and birth certificates and all is so important. And the secretary brought up the front and I brought up the rear of that infomercial. So I hope that will be launched soon because it's an excellent opportunity to share with the individuals why they need to do what they need to do to be better before they go home. So thank you all for doing that. I know, Mr. Chair, we need to move on, so yes. I'm going to try to go to you.
Yes. And because we're at 11:52 at this time, we're going to move right on to my comments, which are very limited. I know you're all disappointed, but I would like to remind you about the code of conduct. If you could take the opportunity to review that code of conduct. The importance of this is because it really gives you an overview of how this task force operates and how it interfaces with the public, as well as how we deal with one another. I want to inform you all at this time that the governor's office has inquired about the participation level. I'll say it again. I'll say it one more time for the recording. The governor's office has inquired from the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Service about the participation among members of the task force, to include those meetings that are subcommittee meetings. And so the thought behind this is that if individuals are not participating, if you're not coming to the monthly meetings, if you're not coming to subcommittee meetings, that there is really absolutely no need in being a member of the task force, and we can replace individuals with people who really want to be a part of the task force and do the work. This is not a task force that you just join and have your name on the roster and you're able to Google Maryland Task Force and see your name populate on the screen. We're actually doing a lot of work. I want to thank everybody for the work that you are doing. It is wonderful. I think that we're coming a long way, but as things pick up, as our pace picks up, as we get this information as Ms. Cobb and her subcommittee start to formalize the report and put things in perspective, it's important to note that everyone that's a member is expected to show up for the main meetings, the general meeting, and show up for the subcommittee meeting. And for people who are not showing up, I'm going to ask the department, because they are the liaison between this task force and the governor's office, to make sure that the governor's office is aware of attendance on a regular basis. So that is my comment, and I will move right along. to subcommittee reports. And since I'm already running my mouth, I will take the liberty to give an overview of what's going on in the assessment and gap identification subcommittee. And that is that we're proud to say that we've worked with Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services to ensure that the II survey was completed. Big thanks to Ms. Rappaport, who has carried our water and ensured that we've received everything that we've requested as it pertains to that survey. So thank you very much, as well as all responses from the DPSCS questionnaire. And anybody who has not taken the time to read the questionnaire, you're missing out on a great deal of information. Information that's valuable as the presentation provided by Assistant Secretary Garino. So I would really challenge you to take the time. It's a lot of responses, but to read those responses. And here's the reason why. Following this meeting, probably within the next couple of days, I'm going to send out a Google form. And this Google form will allow you to put down proposed follow-up questions to the survey. Now, with that being said, we're only going to submit follow-up questions one time to the department. So I want to make sure that we get it right. And we put down the questions that we want following the initial line of question that we've asked them. So we'll give everyone about 2 weeks to respond to the Google survey, and all of those questions the subcommittee will discuss, and then we'll pass it over to Ms. Rappaport. And as she did the last time, she will ensure that those responses are given back to us. And once we receive them, I can assure you, we will put them in the drive, and you will have those responses as well. The last thing I'd ask to mention is the focus group. Ellen has been working on that with the Commissioner and Assistant Secretary Brooks. So, Ms. Rappaport, can you please kind of talk to us about the idea of the focus group in respects to the institutions we've identified that we're going to have the focus groups in? I see you twitching your mouth, so you're like, wait a minute. And I will tell you, we're going to have 6 members of the task force. We did agree on that. That's 2 per subcommittee. So 2 from Dr. Andres' subcommittee, 2 from Vanessa's subcommittee, and 2 people from my subcommittee will be a part of the focus group committee. Ms. Rappaport, do you have anything to say about the focus group?
No, I think it's just a matter of selecting dates now, so I can work with the commissioner on that. We've identified that you would like at least 8 to 10 incarcerated individuals within the, I believe it was 18 months before they were leaving, all security levels. Yeah, that's what we have. I know Patuxent and MCIW were on the list. And I believe there was Dorsey Run, I believe was the other one in Jessup, correct?
I think we said that we were going to look at the institutions that had the lowest responses from the survey, with the thought that we want to hear from those institutions as well. So right. Looking at what Assistant Secretary Garino has put together, if we could look at see how many responses we've got from the lowest institutions, and those are some of the institutions that we definitely want to visit.
I'm happy to provide an adjusted list that accounts for the population and the institutions at the time, so that it's easier to compare some of the larger institutions. I do recall from when I last looked at this with Director Rappaport that Patuxent was at the bottom of that list.
Yeah, and also we most definitely will automatically do MCIW. They will automatically be on the
Right.
list. Outside of that, so more to follow on the focus groups. Outside of that, that is it for my subcommittee, and we're going to be meeting next Friday for sure. I'm going to put that on the calendar. I'm gonna pass it on to Dr. Andres.
Yes, thank you. So I just dropped in the chat a quick summary. Our subcommittee met yesterday, and in terms of engagement to you know what the chair was just speaking to. I mean, can you also hear me? Okay.
Loud and clear.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. In terms of engagement, and you know anyone else could kind of speak to this from our subcommittee on post-release and expansion, but we get pretty good attendance and also very strong conversations from our sessions. I was actually unable to join. I'm on the West Coast at the moment, so our meeting yesterday, I was unable to chair or be the lead the meeting, but it still went really well, and the engagement has been strong, for each month's meeting. We had Tholen, as a quick update, we had Tholen Twyman come in from 211 Maryland database. So, of course, you might recall that we had Donna share with us her work with Return Home Baltimore. And so it was a plan to bring in, someone from 211. So we had Tholen Twyman join us and give us a better understanding of 211. So 211 is a database that has information available for services for people who've been impacted or coming home. And so we had a conversation around that. We identified some gaps and concerns, and you can read the summary if you'd like to get a better understanding of some of those gaps. But quickly, some of those barriers were transportation, the usability of the app, the lack of housing options on the app, maybe also finding ways to add more resources to the website. I should say website instead of app, I guess. And yeah, I don't know if anyone else from the subcommittee wanted to add to the comment, add to that summary.
Yes, Dr. Andres, this is Ade Adeniji. In addition to what Dr. Andres earlier on said, of course, low barrier housing is one of the barriers that we are looking at here, and how to make it easy for those returning to access housing. The other information that I thought was interesting during the meeting was the 211 website. By the way, Tholen did a very wonderful job in gathering information to be posted on the website. And I found out from her, maybe the rest of you already know this, that every search that is put into that website is being tracked by 211, which provides a very rich data source as to what people's needs are when they search on the 211 website. So I think that's an area where personally I'm interested in exploring even further, because that's one thing I believe DHCD would also like to follow up on, particularly as it pertains to people searching for housing and some supportive services needs. I just wanted to add that, Dr. Andres.
I can add something too to the meetings. I've been to the last two. They've been great. Particularly, I've been working with Tholen for years on Reentry, and she did a great job. Mr. Adenja, I can tell you that on Return Home Baltimore, the most visited page is housing by far. And I've got the Google Analytics for that. But the woman Ms. Leah from the Supportive House Community Supportive Housing Corporation, who spoke, that was a fabulous presentation. And thank you for making that possible. It'd be great if we could do something with it, you know. So thank you.
Oh, all right, moving right along. I don't think Vanessa is on here anymore, but I'm going to call. Is there a member from the Division Development and Coordination Subcommittee on? Who else is on that subcommittee?
I'm here.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, I was trying to unmute my mic and everything.
So,
How's everyone doing today? Go ahead.
yeah, no, please, can you give us a update on where you all are at and how things are going? I know they're going.
Yeah, we've been working through looking at the executive summary and that was presented to us, and then also like trying to partner, like meet with some of the different divisions so we can get a really good understanding of what services they're actually offering, and then how we can, you know, look at what the Department of Safety and Corrections is doing, and then what other, you know, what other organizations are doing so that we can align them to kind of make recommendations, I guess. I'm sorry. Hope that was clear.
Okay. All right.
I don't know if Mr. Brooks wants to elaborate. Secretary Brooks.
His mic is muted. Okay. Going once, going twice. All right. We're going to move over to, thank you, Brianna, for that. Moving over to Ms. Cobb.
All right, everybody. I think I have the least popular committee, truthfully, because for whatever reason, I don't know if my calendar invitations are reaching people or if my emails aren't reaching people, but my last attempt to have meetings has generated essentially just my amazing co-chair, Christian Gant, and the wonderful LaShawn Ponder-Mosley to attend my meeting. So I just sent out an email to everyone on my committee, future dates, and I would love to know, did you get the message? Can you come? Are you, are these, it would just be great to know. But putting that, in addition to that, when we met this time, we decided to kind of take the bull by the horns. Question, is the deadline October 31st or October 1st, 2026 for this report?
October 2026.
Yeah, but is it the 1st or the 31st?
Let's act like it's the 1st.
Okay, that's what we did. So what we did when we last met was, and I won't get too much in the weeds to this, but we've assigned deadlines. Given that we have a new date, I looked at everyone's work plans, and none of the work plans seem to have taken into account that we have a new date. And being a lawyer who lived by deadlines and knowing that, at least for me, nothing gets done if you don't have a deadline, we've set forth some deadlines for the subcommittees to consider given where they are in their process. Two thoughts that we had for their Financials Committee and for Vanessa Bright's committee was that your piece of this report lends itself to be more of a narrative as opposed to a list of recommendations, which is what Dr. Andrees's committee, I think, will be doing, because they've got to make a vast array of recommendations. So again, I'll send this all out. It's on the Google Drive. We've given you some ideas. When we want you to send us what we would call your outline or table of contents by the end of September for the Assessment Game Committee and the Division Design Development Committee. Just sort of, what is your table of contents? What's your outline look like? We'll give you feedback by the end of October. And then there's a November deadline. And at the end of the year, we're all going to get together and figure out how are we doing? Are we making progress? What are the deadlines going to be? Going forward? The bottom line is we want all committees who have completed their recommendations essentially by March 30th, 2026. That will give time to submit the recommendations to DPSES, to Chairman Hatch, so they can give us some feedback sometime in April, so that by middle of May, we have a draft report that we can then spend the summer tweaking, and editing and amending as needed. We've come up with a fillable PDF for recommendations that will best be used by the Post-Release Services Committee. We have a language and style guide in terms of what words we're going to use, what they mean. We're going to, and that's in the Google Drive. And we've recruited a formerly incarcerated gentleman named Bobby Pittman, who was in the UB Second Chance program, who is now out and working on his master's, and also who is going to be our fact checker. And so we've got him, and we've also got some possibilities with students at Bowie State's Prison Education Project. We're working on recruiting some others to help us fact check and just be a resource for us. So that's where things stand. I want to thank my co-chair, Christian Gant, who's been fantastic, and LaShawn Quiner-Mosley, who's a volunteer. She's not even a formal member of the committee, who's very dedicated to reentry, and from whom I'm also grateful for helping us move forward here. So all of the stuff is on the Google Drive. Folks, I would love feedback on the deadlines, and we look forward to starting to put all of this together.
Thank you so much. Before I adjourn this meeting, I want to make an announcement to the subcommittee chairs. It's very, very important that you send me the attendance of your subcommittee meetings. Again, attendance is being tracked and reported to the governor's office, and so rather than you last minute sending it over to me, when you have a meeting, please send me over the attendance, so that when we send the report into the department and to the governor's office, it's easy to translate who's been participating and who hasn't been. Other than that, if there are no announcements, I'm going to go ahead and adjourn, and I will see you all August the 19th.
Right.
Okay, I see Delegate Taylor. She says that the report is officially due October 31st.
Okay, well, that's good. We'll make the most of all this.
Everybody, let's act like it's October.
Yeah.
1st.
Well, that's what we did. And my plea to my committee is, if you get an email from me, could you just let me know you got it? Like thumbs up, got it, a smiley face.
Right.
I just want to feel like I'm not talking to the void.
Got you, darling. Got you, darling.
Thanks for letting me vent about that.
Not a problem. You all take care. See you in August.
Everybody. Yep. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Take care.